The founder's son-in-law laughed when I packed my old composition notebook. It contained the only documentation for 37 proprietary manufacturing processes. He actually laughed. Standing there in his glass-walled corner office, leaning against the desk he'd occupied for all of 18 months, watching me slide that black composition notebook into my bag like it was a relic from a museum. Connor Walsh, 31 years old, Stanford MBA, Vice President of Operations at Ridgeline Manufacturing. Not because he earned it, because he married the founder's daughter. He looked at that notebook the way you'd look at a fax machine in a spaceship, like it was something quaint, something beneath him. That notebook held every forging temperature, every pressure sequence, every proprietary technique I'd developed over 26 years. 37 processes. The kind of institutional knowledge that doesn't exist on any server, any shared drive, any cloud platform. It existed in my handwriting, in black ink, on college-ruled composition paper. And Connor Walsh thought it was funny. I didn't correct him, didn't explain. Just zipped the bag shut and stood up. I understand perfectly, I said. My things are already packed. Have a good afternoon, Connor. He barely looked up from his MacBook Pro. That was Tuesday, 4:15 p.m., but I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Hank Strickland. I'm 55 years old. I spent 8 years in the United States Navy, 1987 to 1995, machinist's mate first class, specializing in nuclear propulsion systems aboard fast attack submarines. The kind of work where if you make a mistake, you don't get a performance review. You get a funeral. I joined Ridgeline Manufacturing in 1998, 26 years ago, back when the company was running 12 employees out of a corrugated steel building off Route 9 that smelled like cutting oil and burnt coffee. Ed Mitchell, the founder, hired me personally. Shook my hand in the parking lot before I even filled out the paperwork. Navy man, Ed said, looking at my resume. Nuclear propulsion. You know how to keep things running when they absolutely cannot stop running. Yes, sir. That's all I needed to hear. I started on the floor. Forge operator. $14.50 an hour. The machines were old Clearfield presses from the 70s, temperamental as mules, and nobody had documentation for half the tooling specs. Everything lived in the heads of the guys who'd been there longest. When those guys retired, the knowledge walked out the door with them. I decided that wasn't going to happen on my watch. Navy training. You document everything. Every procedure, every sequence, every deviation. So I started writing things down. Not on company systems. Ridgeline didn't have company systems back then. Ed ran payroll on a legal pad. I bought a Fisher Space Pen at the hardware store for $6.50 and a black composition notebook from the drugstore for $2.19. I wrote during my lunch breaks. I wrote at my kitchen table after Sarah put dinner on the stove. I wrote on weekends when something clicked in my head at 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep until I'd worked through the metallurgy. Sarah, my wife, she used to bring me coffee when she'd find me at the kitchen table with that notebook at midnight. Never complained. Never told me I was crazy for spending my free time solving problems for a company that wasn't paying me overtime. Sarah died 4 years ago. Breast cancer. Diagnosed in March. Gone by November. The fastest and slowest 7 months of my life. I missed 2 days of work. 2. Because the machines don't stop, and because sitting in an empty house was worse than standing on a floor where I could hear myself think over the sound of hydraulic presses. My son Thomas is 21 now. Senior at State University, studying mechanical engineering. Smart kid. Smarter than me. His tuition is $28,400 a year, and I pay every dime of it because Sarah and I promised him we would, and I don't break promises to people I love. So, yes, I had financial obligations. That fact will matter later. Over 26 years, I developed 37 proprietary forging techniques for Ridgeline Manufacturing. Heat treatment sequences for aerospace-grade titanium alloys, pressure curves for wing spar mounts that reduced microfracture rates by 62%. A thermal shielding process that 3 separate engineering firms told Ed couldn't be done without equipment Ridgeline couldn't afford. I did it with a modified Clearfield press, a $340 pyrometer from a restaurant supply catalog, and 47 pages of handwritten calculations. Every single process lived in those composition notebooks. Not one notebook. Dozens over the years. But always the same brand. Always the same black cover. Always written with that same FisherSpace pen. The company never invested in formal process documentation. Ed always said he was going to. Never did. And I never pushed, because I was too busy actually doing the work to sit through meetings about documenting the work. Nobody at Ridgeline ever asked me to sign a patent assignment agreement. Nobody ever asked to digitize my notes. Nobody ever questioned that the notebooks were mine, written on my own materials, on my own time, with a pen I bought myself. This will also matter later. By 2024, Ridgeline Manufacturing was a $450 million company. 240 employees. Aerospace contracts with 3 of the 5 largest defense prime contractors in the country. Our rejection rate on forged components was 0.3%. Industry average was 2.1%. That gap, that precision, that reputation, it came from those 37 processes. My processes. And then, 18 months ago, Connor Walsh showed up. He married Courtney Mitchell in June of 2022. Big wedding. Vineyard in Napa. Ed paid for the whole thing. By September, Connor had a corner office and the title of Vice President of Operations. He was 30 years old. He had never set foot on a manufacturing floor that wasn't part of a Stanford case study tour. His first week, he called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. The room smelled like old coffee and machine oil from the guys who came straight off the floor. Connor stood at the front in a slim-fit navy suit with no tie, sleeves rolled to his forearms like he'd seen it on a leadership podcast thumbnail. Ridgeline has an incredible foundation, he said, but foundation isn't enough. We need to talk about scalability, about digital transformation, about taking this company from a legacy operation to a lean, agile, world-class manufacturing platform. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. He used the word optimization 11 times in 40 minutes. I counted. Over the next 18 months, Connor brought in consultants. Apex Solutions. 3 guys in khakis with iPads who walked the floor taking photographs and asking my operators questions they couldn't answer because the questions didn't make sense. Connor restructured the reporting hierarchy twice. He eliminated the senior machinist mentorship program that I'd built over 15 years because it was, and I'm quoting directly, not scalable. He never once asked me how the forging processes worked. Never opened a notebook. Never pulled up a chair next to a press and watched a pour. He didn't understand what we did. He understood what it looked like on a slide deck. 18 months. I watched. I waited. Navy training. You don't react. You observe. You document. You prepare. Then came Tuesday, 4:15 p.m. Connor called me to the mahogany conference room on the 3rd floor, the one with the frosted glass doors and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the parking lot. There was an HR rep standing behind him, young woman, maybe 25, holding a tablet against her chest like a shield. She wouldn't look at me. Connor sat at the head of the table, fingers laced, practiced expression, the face of a man who'd rehearsed this in front of a mirror. "Hank, let's be real," he said. "You're a relic of a legacy system that doesn't scale with our digital transformation. We need fresh energy, not old ink." I sat down, folded my hands on the table. "We've engaged Apex Solutions to digitize and modernize all floor operations," he continued. "Your role as Master Process Manager is being eliminated effective immediately. We're offering 1-month severance and continuation of benefits through the quarter." He slid a manila folder across the table. I didn't open it. This isn't personal, he added. It's about the company's future. I looked at him for a long time, long enough that the HR rep shifted her weight. I understand perfectly, I said. Connor blinked. He'd expected something. Anger, maybe. Begging. Some display he could manage with his rehearsed empathy lines. That's good, he said. That's professional of you, Hank. I stood up, pushed the manila folder back across the table without opening it. I don't want the severance. Now he blinked again. Differently. You're declining the severance package? I am. Hank, I'd strongly recommend you have an attorney review the terms before you make any... I don't want it. I walked to the door. Stopped. Turned halfway back. My things are already packed. Have a good afternoon, Connor. The HR rep's tablet was shaking slightly in her hands. I walked to my desk. 26 years of work, and it fit in one cardboard box and a leather messenger bag Sarah had given me for our 20th anniversary. The box held a coffee mug, a framed photo of Thomas at his high school graduation, and a small brass paperweight shaped like an anchor that my crew gave me when I left the Navy. The bag held the black composition notebook. As I walked toward the exit, I passed Connor's office. The door was cracked open. He was on the phone. His voice carried into the hallway better than he realized. No, it went clean. Textbook. Strickland won't cause problems. He's got a kid in college and a mortgage. He'll fall in line and hand over the notes if we offer a month's severance. I stopped walking. Stood there in the hallway for 6 seconds. He'll fall in line. Something shifted in me. Not anger. Something quieter. Something older and more patient than anger. I kept walking. Past the break room. Past the floor entrance, where I could hear the Clearfield presses, running the same rhythm I'd calibrated 9 years ago. Past the front desk, where the receptionist, who'd known me for 19 years, had tears running down her face and couldn't say a word. I pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. The late afternoon sun hit the asphalt, and everything smelled like warm metal and diesel. My truck was parked in the same spot I'd parked it every day for 26 years. 3rd row, 4th from the left. I put the box in the bed, put the bag on the passenger seat. The black composition notebook sat on top, its cover worn soft at the corners from 2 decades of use. I sat in the cab for a long time. Rex was waiting for me at home. Thomas would call on Sunday like he always did. The mortgage payment was due on the 15th. Connor Walsh thought I was a relic. Thought the notebook was a prop. Thought I'd come crawling back for 30 days of severance pay because I had a kid in college and no options. He was wrong about every single part of that. I turned the key. The engine caught. And I drove home. If you've ever had a boss or been in a situation like this, hit that like button and subscribe. I drove 40 minutes north to the cabin. Not the house. The cabin. 3 rooms on 2 acres that Sarah and I bought in 2011 when she said we needed a place where the phone didn't ring and the machines didn't hum. Cedar siding, a stone fireplace, and a back porch that looked out over nothing but white pines and sky. I hadn't been up there in almost 5 months. Rex rode shotgun with his head out the window the whole way, ears flapping like he'd been waiting for this trip his entire life. Smart dog. He knew something had shifted before I did. I unlocked the front door at 6:47 p.m. The cabin smelled like old leather and pine dust. I set the messenger bag on the kitchen table. The black composition notebook sat there under the light of the single overhead fixture, its cover soft and dark. 26 years of work pressed between cardboard covers that cost $2.19. I poured 3 fingers of Blanton's. The good stuff, not the daily drinker. The bottle Sarah gave me for my 50th birthday. The one I'd only opened twice since she died. Once on the anniversary of her passing. Once when Thomas got accepted to state. This felt like the right occasion for a 3rd time. I sat on the back porch. Rex settled at my feet with a groan, his chin on my boot. The white pines were black against a darkening sky, and the only sound was crickets and the occasional creak of the cabin settling into its foundation. I turned off my phone, held the power button until the screen went dark and the little vibration stopped, set it face down on the porch railing. Silence. The thing about silence is that most people can't tolerate it. They fill it with noise, with action, with panic. They confuse stillness with surrender. Connor Walsh would never understand what I was doing because Connor Walsh had never been trained to sit in a steel tube 400 feet beneath the Atlantic and wait. Just wait. While systems around you ticked and hummed, and the only thing keeping you alive was the fact that someone, somewhere, had followed the procedure exactly as it was written. I knew what was coming. Not because I was smarter than Connor, because I was more patient, and because I'd prepared for this moment 3 years ago. The morning after the firing, I made black coffee in the cabin's old drip maker and called Arthur Miller at 8:15 a.m. on the landline. Arthur and I served together on the USS Asheville from '89 to '92. He was a machinist's mate second class before he got out and went to law school on the GI Bill. Ended up as a Navy JAG officer for 6 years, then went into private practice specializing in intellectual property. Sharp as a scalpel. Loyal as granite. The kind of man who remembers your birthday and your blood type. It happened, I said. When? Yesterday, 4:15 p.m. Involuntary termination. No cause stated. I declined the severance. Arthur was quiet for 4 seconds. I could hear him thinking through the phone line. You declined the severance. I did. Good. That keeps things clean. No release, no waiver, no assignment of rights. You signed nothing. Nothing. Hank, tell me you still have the notebooks. Every single one. All 26 years. The composition notebooks. The Fisher space pen. The kitchen table receipts. And the one I brought to work every day is sitting on my table right now. Section 8C, Arthur said. Section 8C. There was a sound on his end, a drawer opening, papers sliding. Arthur Miller was the kind of lawyer who kept hard copies of everything that mattered, filed alphabetically in fireproof cabinets. I'm looking at it right now, he said. Your original 1998 employment contract with Ridgeline Manufacturing. Section 8C. Any proprietary methods developed without company-provided materials, digital systems, or during non-standard hours remain the personal property of the inventor, unless formally assigned via a patent assignment agreement. They never asked me to sign one. No, they didn't. And 3 years ago, when you came to me and said you had a feeling the wind was changing, I filed a notarized affidavit of independent invention and a registered trade secret filing with the USPTO. Patent number 8,472,639. The heat shielding process. That filing alone establishes precedent for the entire portfolio. I remember. Hank, do you want me to send the letter? I looked out at the pines, took a sip of coffee. Rex lifted his head and looked at me like he already knew the answer. Send it. Consider it done. Certified return receipt. They'll have it by Thursday morning. Click. Arthur Miller sent a formal cease and desist letter to Ridgeline Manufacturing's legal department via certified mail on Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. The letter was 4 pages long. It cited Section 8, C verbatim. It referenced patent number 8,472,639 and the affidavit of independent invention. It named all 37 proprietary forging processes by their internal designations, the ones I'd created and numbered myself over 26 years. The letter stated, in language Arthur had sharpened like a blade, Ridgeline Manufacturing is hereby notified that the continued use, reproduction, reverse engineering, or derivative application of any of the 37 proprietary forging processes developed by Mr. Henry Strickland, constitutes unauthorized use of personal intellectual property and trade secrets as defined under the Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016. Immediate cessation of all such processes is required pending formal licensing negotiations. Arthur was a smart bastard. Always had been. Meanwhile, I sat on the porch, Rex at my feet, bourbon in the evening, coffee in the morning. I split firewood because my shoulders needed the work and my head needed the rhythm. I didn't check the news. I didn't call anyone. I didn't drive past the plant. I waited. Day 3. Thursday, 2:58 p.m. The cabin's landline rang. It was Scott Thompson, floor supervisor. 48 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that could palm a basketball and a voice that could cut through press noise at 60 feet. Scott had been my right hand on the floor for 14 years. Hank. His voice sounded wrong, tight, like a man holding a door shut against a flood. Scott. It's bad. He told me everything. The Apex Solutions consultants had arrived Monday morning with 3 laptops, a portable scanner, and what Scott described as a confidence level that lasted about 4 hours. They tried to run the titanium alloy heat treatment sequence on Press 7 using parameters they'd pulled from the general spec sheets. General spec sheets don't have my temperatures, I said. No, they don't. The first batch came out brittle. Microfractures across the entire run. 46 wing spar mounts. Every single one rejected by QC. Day 7. The consultants adjusted. They tried reverse engineering the pressure curves by running test pours and measuring outputs. Metallurgical guesswork, like trying to recreate a recipe by tasting the soup. They burned through $340,000 in raw titanium in 5 days, Scott said. Connor told them to keep going. Day 14. Lisa Baker, a 29-year-old junior analyst in the quality department, flagged the first major defect batch in the system. 46 aerospace wing spar mounts, destined for Northrop's F-35 subcontract line, failed pressure testing at 1,200 pounds per square inch. Specification required 1,850 pounds per square inch minimum. They didn't just fail. They shattered. Defect rate? I asked. 340% above baseline. I didn't say anything. Hank, that's not the worst part. Northrop's quality team got the report Tuesday. By day 21, they froze the order. All of it. $87 million. Then Lockheed heard. They froze too. Another $88 million. $175 million. Frozen. In 21 days. Connor's walking the floor now, Scott said. He's got that look. You know the look. Like a man who just realized the building doesn't have a foundation. How's the team? Scared. Half of them are updating resumes. Dave Horton put in his 2 weeks yesterday. Said he's not going to be the one holding the bag when the FAA starts asking questions. The FAA. I hadn't even thought about the regulatory implications yet. Aerospace forgings aren't consumer goods. Every component has a certification chain. Every process has to be traceable, repeatable, documented. The documentation for Ridgeline's processes lived in one place. My handwriting, my notebooks, my kitchen table. Scott, I appreciate the call. Hank, are you coming back? People are asking. The whole floor is asking. I don't work there anymore, Scott. Silence on his end. Then, quietly. No one here has forgotten you. Not now, not ever. I hung up. Day 18. The landline rang again. Different number. I let it ring 9 times, then picked up. It was Ed Mitchell's secretary. Ed wanted to talk. Urgently. Tell Ed I'm not available right now. Day 19. My cell phone was still off. Had been since Tuesday. I turned it on at 6 a.m. just to check if Thomas had called. He had. One voicemail, Sunday night. Like clockwork. Hey, Dad! Just checking in. Finished my thermodynamics final. Pretty sure I crushed it. Call me when you get a chance. Love you." I called him back. We talked for 20 minutes about thermodynamics and his roommate's terrible cooking and whether the transmission on his Civic was going to last another winter. He didn't ask about work. He knew I'd tell him when I was ready. After I hung up with Thomas, I looked at the notification bar on my phone. 42 missed calls from Connor Walsh. I stared at that number for a long time. 42 times, the man who called me a relic, who laughed at my notebook, who told his phone I'd fall in line because I had a kid in college and a mortgage. 42 times, that man had called me looking for help. I turned the phone off again. Click. Rex looked up from his spot by the fireplace. Tail thumped once against the floor. "Not yet, buddy," I said. That same afternoon, 4:15 p.m. exactly, 3 weeks to the minute from when Connor Walsh fired me, the Ridgeline Manufacturing boardroom was not quiet. I know because Scott called the landline again that evening and told me every detail. The Apex Solutions team had formally withdrawn from the engagement. Their project lead sent a 2-paragraph email that Scott read to me verbatim. The relevant sentence was, "The proprietary processes employed at Ridgeline Manufacturing are not derivable from standard metallurgical parameters and cannot be replicated without access to the original developer's methodology and documentation." Cannot be replicated. Connor had received Arthur Miller's cease and desist letter the previous Thursday. He'd called it a bluff from a retired Navy buddy playing lawyer. He'd told the legal department to ignore it. The legal department did not ignore it. Lisa Baker, the junior analyst, had been running numbers all week. She walked into the weekly operations meeting with a single sheet of paper and hands that were shaking. "Mr. Walsh," she said, "current weekly revenue loss from frozen orders and production downtime is $12.5 million. At this rate, we'll burn through our operating reserves in 6 weeks. $12.5 million a week. Burning like a fuse." Connor told her to sit down and let the adults handle it. But it was the general counsel, a man named Robert Fleming, who ended the meeting. Fleming had spent the previous 48 hours reviewing Hank Strickland's original 1998 employment contract, the cease and desist letter, the USPTO filing, and the affidavit of independent invention. He'd called 2 outside IP firms to verify what he already suspected. He stood up, adjusted his glasses, looked directly at Connor Walsh. "Mr. Walsh, I need to inform the board immediately. The legal team has reviewed Section 8C of Mr. Strickland's original employment contract." "What about it?" "Mr. Mitchell, the legal team just reviewed Section 8C. We don't own the forging temperatures. Strickland does. All 37 of them." The room went still. Scott said you could hear the HVAC system cycling. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. You could hear Connor Walsh's leather chair creak as the blood drained from his face. "That's not possible," Connor said. "It is possible. It is documented. It is notarized. And it is already filed with the USPTO. Patent number 8,472,639. Connor stood up. His chair rolled backward and hit the credenza. "Get Strickland on the phone. Now." Scott said 3 people reached for their phones simultaneously. My cell went straight to voicemail. The cabin landline rang and rang in an empty room because I was outside splitting wood with Rex lying in the grass watching me. 42 missed calls became 43. I didn't hear a single one. The call I did answer came at 7 a.m. on day 23. I was standing in the cabin kitchen, pouring black coffee from the old drip maker, when I heard tires on gravel. Rex's ears went up before the engine cut. He padded to the front door and stood there, tail low, not wagging, alert, the way he gets when someone shows up who isn't Thomas. I looked through the window. A silver Cadillac Escalade was parked behind my truck. The driver's door opened, and Ed Mitchell stepped out. 74 years old, Ed Mitchell. The man who shook my hand in a parking lot 26 years ago and gave me a shot based on nothing but a DD-214 and a firm grip. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, no jacket, and he moved slower than I remembered. His face looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. There were circles under his eyes, dark enough to see from 30 feet away. He walked to the porch steps, stopped, looked at me through the screen door. "Hank?" "Ed, can I come in?" I held the screen door open. Rex sniffed Ed's hand once, then went back to his spot by the fireplace. Ed stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands in his pockets, looking at the black composition notebook, still sitting on the table where I'd left it 23 days ago. He stared at it for a long time. "I let family cloud my business judgment," he said. Not to me, to the notebook, to the room, to himself. "I gave a boy a man's job because my daughter asked me to, and I didn't listen when people told me it was a mistake because I didn't want to believe my own family could be that reckless." I poured him a cup of coffee. Black. Set it on the table. "Sit down, Ed." He sat, wrapped both hands around the mug like a man trying to warm himself from the inside. "I fired Connor yesterday," he said. "Emergency board session. Unanimous. 8-0. Not a single member hesitated." I sat across from him, said nothing. "You want to know how it happened?" "I expect you're going to tell me." Ed took a sip of coffee. His hands were steady, but his voice wasn't. The board convened at 2 p.m. on day 22. Emergency session. 8 members present, including Ed, who had driven in from the golf course, still wearing his cleats. Robert Fleming, the general counsel, presented the situation in 14 minutes. He used a projector for the first time in Ridgeline history, because, as Ed put it, the numbers were too ugly to say out loud without visual proof. Slide 1. Defect rate at 340% above baseline. Slide 2. $175 million in frozen aerospace orders. Slide 3. Weekly revenue hemorrhage of $12.5 million. Slide 4. Section 8C of Hank Strickland's 1998 employment contract, blown up to fill the screen, with the relevant clause highlighted in yellow. Any proprietary methods developed without company-provided materials, digital systems, or during non-standard hours remain the personal property of the inventor, unless formally assigned via a patent assignment agreement. Fleming read it twice, the second time slower. Slide 5. The USPTO registration. Patent number 8,472,639. Filed 3 years prior. Hank Strickland, sole inventor. The affidavit of independent invention, notarized and time-stamped. Arthur Miller's cease and desist letter with certified return receipt showing Ridgeline's legal department had signed for it 9 days ago. "We were notified," Fleming said to the room. "Formally, legally, 9 days ago. The directive from Mr. Walsh was to, and I'm quoting his email, file it and forget it." Ed said the room went silent for 11 seconds. He counted. Connor was sitting at the far end of the table. He'd been summoned 30 minutes before the meeting and told nothing about the agenda. He was wearing the slim-fit suit. The designer haircut was still perfect, but his face was the color of old paper. "This is a negotiating tactic," Connor said. "Strickland's buddy filed some paperwork to scare us into giving him a bigger severance. We call his bluff, we bring in another consulting firm, and we reverse engineer the processes within 60 days. Fleming shook his head. "Mr. Walsh, Apex Solutions spent 18 days and $340,000 in raw materials attempting exactly that. Their formal withdrawal letter states, and I quote, 'The proprietary processes cannot be replicated without access to the original developer's methodology.' We retained 2 outside IP firms for independent review. Both confirmed that Mr. Strickland's claim under Section 8C is legally sound. The notebooks were written on personal materials, during non-standard hours, with a pen purchased by Mr. Strickland himself. No patent assignment agreement was ever executed. The trade secrets are his." Connor stood up. He put both hands on the table and leaned forward. I am the vice president of operations. I made a strategic decision to modernize this company. You don't get to second guess that because some old machinist is throwing a tantrum with a notebook. Ed told me what happened next. He said it calmly, the way a man describes something he's replayed in his head 100 times and will replay 100 more. Ed Mitchell stood up from his chair. Slowly. He was still wearing the golf cleats, and they clicked against the hardwood floor in the silence of that boardroom. Every head turned. That old machinist, Ed said, built every process that makes this company worth $450 million. He did it with a $6.50 pen and a $2.19 notebook. He missed his wife's last good months because he was on this floor, keeping your contracts running. He never asked for a title, a bonus, or a corner office. And you fired him because he didn't fit on a slide deck. Connor opened his mouth. Sit down. Connor sat. Ed looked around the table. 8 board members. Men and women he'd known for decades, some of them since the corrugated steel building on Route 9. I'm calling a vote. Motion to terminate Connor Walsh as Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. All in favor. 8 hands went up. Everyone. 8-0. Ed looked at his son-in-law. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal items. You have 15 minutes. The same security guard. Ed told me that, and I could tell it mattered to him that I knew. The same guard who had stood by the door when Connor fired me. A man named Dale Wilcox, 52 years old, who'd been at Ridgeline for 11 years and who shook my hand every morning at the entrance for the last decade of those 11. Dale Wilcox walked Connor Walsh out of the boardroom, down the hall, past the frosted glass doors, to the glass-walled corner office. Connor packed his MacBook Pro, a framed Stanford diploma, and a leather portfolio his father-in-law had given him as a hiring gift. The same leather portfolio he'd never once opened in 18 months. 15 minutes. Then the glass doors. Then the parking lot. Connor's BMW was in the reserved spot, the spot that had been mine until 18 months ago. Dale held the door. Connor Walsh drove out of the Ridgeline Manufacturing parking lot at 3:47 p.m., 22 days after he'd laughed at a black composition notebook. He did not look back. 2 days later, his LinkedIn profile was updated. The title read, Strategic Consultant, Open to Opportunities. No mention of Ridgeline. No mention of optimization or digital transformation or legacy weight. Ed sat at my kitchen table and told me all of this. Then, he set down his coffee. I need you back, Hank. I know you do. Not as Master Process Manager, as Chief Process Officer. Seat on the board. Full authority over floor operations, process development, and quality certification. Reporting directly to me and the board. No intermediaries. I looked at the composition notebook on the table. The worn cover. The soft corners. Arthur Miller will need to review the terms. I'd expect nothing less. And Ed, yes. The processes stay mine. Licensed to Ridgeline under terms Arthur and I approve. Not assigned. Licensed. Ed nodded, slowly, like a man who understood he was agreeing to something he should have offered 20 years ago. Fair. Arthur Miller and Ridgeline's legal team spent 4 days drafting the new contract. Arthur called me at the cabin on day 27 and read me the final terms. Chief Process Officer. Board seat. Base salary. I won't mention because it wasn't about the salary. A $2.4 million signing bonus. Full licensing agreement for all 37 proprietary processes, with annual royalty provisions and a reversion clause that made Section 8C look like a handshake. Arthur had sharpened every sentence like he was forging the contract on an anvil. You comfortable with this? Arthur asked. I am. Then sign it and go back to work. Those presses need you. I drove back to Ridgeline on a Monday morning. 7:15 a.m. Same parking spot. third row, fourth from the left. Rex was at home this time, but I'd left the radio on for him. He'd manage. I walked through the glass doors. The receptionist, the same woman who'd had tears on her face 27 days earlier, stood up from behind her desk. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just nodded, and her eyes were wet again, but for different reasons. The floor was quiet. Not the good quiet of precision machinery running in rhythm. The wrong quiet. Machines at idle. 3 presses cold. The smell of cutting oil was stale instead of sharp. Scott Thompson was waiting by press 7. He saw me and put his hand over his mouth for a second. Then he dropped it. "Welcome back, boss." "Not boss. Same as before. Just Hank." "No, sir. Not the same as before. Not anymore." There was a nameplate on the office door next to the main floor entrance. An office I'd never used because I preferred to be on the floor. The nameplate was brass. New. Hank Strickland, Chief Process Officer. I stood there and looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then I opened the door, set the messenger bag on the desk, and took out the black composition notebook. I opened it to page 1. 26 years of process notes. Forging temperatures, pressure curves, thermal sequences. The handwriting was mine, from the first entry in 1998 to the last entry the week before Connor Walsh fired me. Every page, a record of problems solved at midnight, of calculations worked through on a kitchen table while Sarah brought me coffee, of a career built one pour, one press, 1 degree at a time. I closed it, set it on the desk, and I went to work. It took 11 days to get the floor back to full production. I recalibrated every press personally, walked every operator through every sequence. The Northrop order unfroze on day 9. Lockheed followed on day 11. $175 million back in motion. The following Sunday, Thomas drove down from state. We sat on the back deck of the house, not the cabin, and I grilled steaks while Rex lay in the grass between us, tail thumping against the earth every time one of us said his name. "Dad," Thomas said, "you seem different." "Different how?" "Less tired. Like you're actually here when you're here." I looked at my son, 21 years old, Sarah's eyes, my stubbornness. Halfway through a mechanical engineering degree, and already smarter than most of the consultants I'd met in 26 years. "I'm here," I said. We ate. We talked about his thermodynamics grade. He'd gotten an A. Of course he had. After dinner, he went inside to call his girlfriend, and I sat alone on the deck with 3 fingers of Blanton's in a glass and Rex at my feet. The sky was going orange and purple over the tree line. City lights just starting to come on in the distance. A new black composition notebook sat on the arm of the chair beside me. Blank, fresh, $2.19 from the drugstore, same as always. I picked up the Fisher Space pen. Same model, same weight in my hand. I opened the notebook to the first page. Didn't write anything yet. Just held the pen over the paper and looked out at the fading sky. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, with calm hands and a steady resolve. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.